Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video we got another trade video to discuss, as we got a lot of things to talk about, including some signings, some injury updates, a whole slew of pieces of news involving coaching situations, some other pieces of news, and Utah's new team name. Plus we got a couple of trade rumors involving Ottawa, St. Louis, the New York Rangers, and a couple of other teams. We'll get to all of that coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Before we get started, don't forget to like this video and subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this without all of you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below and don't forget to comment down in the comment section below. It really does help out the channel, and we're on the road to 500 subscribers. So in today's video, lots of intriguing news to talk about. We saw a whole bunch of things happen over the last couple of days before the weekend, so we'll touch on all of those here. Once again, we still got a couple of signings to talk about from a few weeks ago, so there are 9 signings I'm going to be touching on in this video here today. So we got 2 Blackhawks and 2 Oilers who signed ELCs over this time frame, so we'll touch on both of these first. As first, the Chicago Blackhawks signed center prospect Ryan Greene, who was 2nd round pick, 57th overall back in 2022, and signed a 3-year ELC with an AAV of $950,000. That was for the rest of this past year plus the next 2 seasons. He got into 2 games of NHL action with the Blackhawks, putting up no points. Greene, I think, eventually is going to be a really solid 3rd, maybe 2nd line center. Can definitely be a solid middle 6 guy, so that's a pretty good sign there for the Blackhawks as they signed Greene, who's been playing over in the NCAA. And then they also signed center left wing prospect, 3rd round pick, 90th overall, also in the 2022 draft, and that is Aiden Thompson. They signed him to a 2-year ELC with an AAV of $895,000. That'll begin at the start of next year. Thompson looks like a very fantastic young prospect. Like I said, same draft as Greene, so they signed a couple of 2022 draft selections, and I think both these guys will have long-term fits in the top 9, and maybe not this upcoming season, but in a few years' time. So interesting note there, but the Hawks do sign a couple of interesting players to ELCs. Then we saw the Edmonton Oilers sign goaltending prospect Samuel Johnsson, who was another 2022 draft pick, 5th round pick, 158th overall, to a 3-year ELC with a AAV of $855,000. Johnsson looks like a really solid prospect there for the Edmonton Oilers. I think eventually could be a decent, maybe backup goaltender for the Oilers in maybe like 3 to 4 years time. So he's definitely going to need to develop a little bit, but that's another interesting sign there from the Edmonton Oilers. Then we saw the Oilers give it another ELC, and that was to undrafted prospect Arto Lepinen, who's the defenseman. He gets a 1-year ELC with AAV of $975,000. He's been playing over in Europe, comes over as an undrafted player. Maybe the Oilers have found a stud here in Lepinen, like some of these other guys who come over from Europe on like short-term ELCs, like a Zub or a McCabe have actually worked out quite well at the NHL level, so maybe Lepinen can be one of those guys too. So an interesting ELC given out by the Edmonton Oilers as they give Lepinen and Johnsson new ELCs. Then we saw one of the bigger ones get signed, and that is with Minnesota, as the Minnesota Wild, just before the playoffs started, signed Zeev Buium, who was the 12th overall pick in the 2024 draft, so just past year's draft. They signed him to a 3-year ELC with an AAV of $966,000. That was for the rest of that year and the 2 years following. He's a left shot defenseman, really solid young up-and-coming defender who I think has a future as being a top 4, if not a top pair defenseman at the NHL level. He wound up playing in, I think it was all 6 or maybe 5 playoff games with the Minnesota Wild, put up a couple of points, didn't have a goal, but still, Buium looked pretty good and didn't look out of place in that playoff series against Vegas, so interesting note there. But Buium signed his 3-year ELC, and he should definitely be a stud on the blue line come next year. Then we saw the Florida Panthers sign one of their few top prospects, and that is 7th round pick back in the 2022 draft, Jack Devine. Devine's a right winger. He looks like eventually he'll be a solid bottom 6, maybe middle 6 forward at the NHL level, sent a 3-year ELC with a AAV of $950,000. I think Devine eventually will be a very fantastic pickup there for the Florida Panthers in their middle 6 or their bottom 6, so that's another interesting signing as the Panthers give an ELC to Devine. Then we said the Anaheim Ducks signed one of their better prospects, and that was 2020 3rd round pick, 67th overall, defensive prospect Ian Moore. Moore signed a 2-year ELC with AAV of $925,000. That was for the rest of the current season and for next year. He got an assist in 3 NHL games at the NHL level for the Ducks after signing that contract. So Moore looks like a very fantastic deep prospect. I think eventually could be a solid 4 or 5 defenseman on that blue line there for the Ducks. So interesting note there, but the Ducks did sign Ian Moore. Then we saw Dallas Stars sign Arno Typhensee, who who's a goaltending prospect, 2023 5th round pick, 157th overall, so another guy who was back in the 2023 draft, to a 2-year ELC with $850,000. They'll be going to start next year. It looks like a really solid goalie prospect. I think eventually could maybe challenge for like a backup role for the Dallas Stars. So interesting note there, but they did sign Typhoncy to a 2-year ELC. And the last signing we're talking about here today is within the Carolina Hurricanes organization, as they signed 2020 3rd round pick Alexander Nikishin to a 2-year ELC with $950,000. That was for this year and next year. He's a left shot defensive prospect, hasn't gotten into any NHL action yet. But he's going to be a very fantastic D prospect in the Carolina Hurricanes organization as early as next year, and I think could help the Hurricanes overcome a loss of a guy like Dmitry Orlov or Brent Burns if they do leave via free agency. So interesting note there, but the Canes have signed Nikishin to an ELC. So lots of intriguing signings from the past couple of days. We saw some bigger names get signed, including Nikishin in Carolina, Devine in Florida, Moore in Anaheim, and Greene in Chicago. So lots of intriguing ELC signings from the past couple of days. Next, going over to a couple of injury updates. So going over to a couple of injury updates, we have a couple of things to talk about here from our past couple of days. First was the St. Louis Blues. After their season finished, GM Doug Armstrong came out and said that it's very unlikely that Torrey Krug, who missed the entire 2024-2025 season due to an ankle injury, will not return and will never play hockey again. He says that it's very likely a career-ending injury after his ankle surgery. He only just got back to getting back to everyday life, so it doesn't sound like Krug will play hockey again, so that's a really bad blow for Torrey Krug, as he had a very long and good run with both the Boston Bruins and the St. Louis Blues. Well, Dylan Holloway, who missed the last bit of the regular season and the postseason, was probably never going to play in the postseason. It sounded like Holloway's injury was going to be a little more longer term than some people expected, and he probably wasn't even going to play if the Blues made the second round, so interesting note there. But Holloway, who should be ready for training camp next year, did miss the last little bit and the playoffs for the St. Louis Blues, and it doesn't sound like Torrey Krug will be back next year. Pavel Dorofeyev in Vegas missed game 1 and 2 of the second round series against the Edmonton Oilers due to an undisclosed injury he suffered in round 1. I think it was back in game 5, and is out day to day. So it sounds like Dorofeyev is progressing, could be back at some point for game 3 or game 4 for the Golden Knights, but he's still injured. Well, Alex Pietrangelo missed game 1 of round 2 as he battled an illness, but was back for game 2. So it's a really big boost to see that Pietrangelo is back after missing game 1 for the Knights, but it's a really bad blow to see Dorofeyev's out for both game 1 and game 2 for Vegas. Carolina's Mark Jankowski left game 1 due to an undisclosed injury and will be a game time decision for game 2. So hopefully Jankowski's able to play and he's not going to be out for an overly long period of time, but it was bad to see that he left the game. Dallas's Jason Robertson, who missed the end of the regular season and entirety of round 1 due to an undisclosed injury, was ready and got back into game action for game 1 of round 2. So that's a huge boost there for Dallas that they got Jason Robertson back into the lineup. Toronto's Anthony Stolarz left game 1 for the Toronto Maple Leafs with an upper body injury and did not return, and didn't play in game 2 or game 3, and also didn't travel with the team to Florida. So it doesn't sound like Stolarz will be back until at the earliest game 5. Such a horrible blow for the Leafs as they lose their starting goaltender in Stolarz, who was beautiful in round 1 playing for the Toronto Maple Leafs. The New Jersey Devils' Jonathan Kovacevic has underwent knee surgery recently and probably won't be ready for the start of training camp. So this is going to be a longer recovery time for Kovacevic, and it doesn't sound like he'll be ready to start training camp. Might even miss the start of the season next year, so that's a bad blow there for New Jersey. Well, Jesper Bratt has underwent shoulder surgery to repair an injury that has been plaguing him actually over the past couple of years, and like we said, he should be ready for training camp. So good to see that Bratt and Kovacevic have undergone their surgeries. It does sound like Bratt will be back by training camp, probably not for Kovacevic, so some interesting updates there for New Jersey. And Mark Scheifele, who missed game 6 and game 7 due to a injury he sustained in game 5 for the Winnipeg Jets, wound up getting back into game action for game 1 of the second round series against Dallas. So it's a big boost there for the Jets as Scheifele got back, so good news there. But interesting out there that Scheifele was able to get back for the Winnipeg Jets. So some interesting injury updates from the past couple of days. Good to see guys like Scheifele, Robertson, and Pietrangelo all get back into game action, and hopefully they don't look too bad in their returns. But bad news to see guys like Krug, Dorofeyev, and Stolarz all be out with injuries, and hopefully they won't be out for an overly long period of time. But some interesting injury updates from our past couple of days. Next, going over to a couple of quick updates when it comes to some news from around the NHL. So I'm just going to rattle off some pieces of news that have happened from our past little while. Eric Staal, the former Eric Staal who played a long tenure in the NHL level, has apparently been hired by Buffalo as a special advisor to GM Kevin Adams. So interesting note there is ST.L did play a couple of years in the Buffalo organization, so interesting note there, but ST.L will be helping the Buffalo Sabres in their front office. Ryan Bowness, who had been an assistant GM with the Ottawa Senators, will not be brought back by the Ottawa Senators, so they will be looking for some more help at the GM position. As Bowness, who had been an assistant GM, will not be brought back in Ottawa. The Avalanche have announced that they are going to be moving away from assistant coach Bennett. So Bennett had been there for quite a bit of time as an assistant coach in Colorado, so they will be moving on from him. Assistant coaches McGill and Taylor will not be brought back by New Jersey, so the Devils and the Avalanche are both moving away from some of their assistant coaches. We do have a coaching update. I said that in that coaching video I'd be bringing you guys updates as soon as they be announced. What we have had an announcement is Joel Quenneville has been named the new head coach in Anaheim. A little bit of a surprise given his whole connections to the Blackhawks scandal and things like that, but like I said, if he's really showed that he's worked back from it and he's a better person now, then maybe they should give him a second chance. I mean, they already gave Stan Bowman, who was suspended for quite a bit of time, a chance to be GM in Edmonton, so it's an interesting, a little bit controversial hire for the Anaheim Ducks, but like I said, if he's a better person now, like he was a great coach during his previous 10 years in like Florida and Chicago and things like that, so if he is a better person, then this could be a really smart hire for the Anaheim Ducks. So interesting note there, but the Ducks position has been filled with Joel Quenneville, and there are now only 6 teams who are looking for a head coach at the NHL level. We also have an update on the Utah Hockey Club, as they are now no longer the Utah Hockey Club. As back a couple of days ago, we saw that Utah has announced that they have officially released their logo, their branding, their things like that, and to not my surprise at least, they've been called the Utah Mammoth. Here's their logo. This will be their logo going forward now, so interesting note there. They'll have this on their home jerseys. They'll keep the Utah branding on their away jerseys, so interesting note there, but we now don't need to call them the Utah Hockey Club anymore. They have their official name. It will be the Utah Mammoth, so very good stuff there. I like the logo. I think it's really good, really ingenious to put the mountain range on top of the Mammoth, so I really do like it. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on what you think about the Mammoth logo and things like that, but Utah is now called the Mammoth, so very good stuff there in Utah. And lastly, going over to just a really quick draft lottery update. I did a separate video about this, doing a mock draft about it, and also live streaming the draft lottery. We saw a couple of major shifts in the draft lottery simulation just a couple of days ago, as the New York Islanders have officially gotten the first overall pick, jumped up 9 spots from 10 to 1 to get that first overall spot, which is insane in and of itself. But then we saw another jump as the Mammoth, who had the 14th best odds, jumped from 14 to 4, which is another insane move. So very interesting stuff there. But after the last couple of years of very lackluster movement in the draft lottery, we see 2 major shifts in the draft lottery that shake up that order entirely. So interesting note there, but just a couple of interesting updates as the Islanders and Utah win draft lottery spots. Bowness won't be back with Ottawa as an assistant GM. Bennett won't be back with Colorado, and McGill and Taylor won't be back with New Jersey as assistant coaches. Quenneville's the new head coach in Anaheim. Eric Staal is now a special advisor in Buffalo, and Utah is officially going to be called the Utah Mammoth. So very interesting stuff there. And lastly, going over to a couple of trade rumors. We got a couple of things to talk about here. So we're going to start off with the Los Angeles Kings and something they apparently wanted to do at the NHL's trade deadline, but they never were able to do so, and that is involving Brad Marchand. According to Elliotte Friedman on the Thursday Thoughts podcast a couple of days ago, he mentioned that the LA Kings were one of the front runners and really did want to acquire Brad Marchand from the Boston Bruins. Now, apparently Marchand really wanted to go to Florida, which is where he ended up, but it does seem like the Kings were really interested and really wanted to acquire Brad Marchand from Florida. So imagine if they were able to do that. I'm not sure if they would still be able to do the Kuzmenko move, but imagine if the LA Kings have Brad Marchand on their second or third line to play against the Edmonton Oilers. Like, you saw Corey Perry was a big pest in that series. Imagine Brad Marchand. So that would have been a very interesting, maybe even turn the tide of that series for the Los Angeles Kings. So we'll never know. Marchand ended up in Florida. He's in the second round right now with the Panthers, so interesting note there. But according to Elliotte Friedman, it did seem like the LA Kings were maybe the second most likely landing spot for Brad Marchand if he wasn't going to end up in Florida. So very intriguing news there. Next, going over to the Vancouver Canucks, we talked about in our last trade rumor video about how there's some talk about them going after a guy like Matt Barzal. Well, according to Ben Kuzma, I think of The Athletic, he was talking about the Vancouver Canucks potentially going after a guy like Dylan Larkin. Now, I highly doubt the Red Wings are going to do this because Larkin is that team's top line center, but we know the Red Wings are going to be in a desperate position this year to make some major moves to get this team right, to make the playoffs this year, because their rebuild and the Sabres rebuild has been left in the dust by Ottawa and Montreal's rebuilds. So they're going to be hard pressed to make the playoffs next year. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some drastic moves from Detroit. I don't think they'll go as far as to trade Dylan Larkin, but if you're looking for a very good first or second line center who can tandem well with Elias Pettersson in the center position, look no further than Dylan Larkin. He would be a great add there for the Vancouver Canucks if that was to happen. I think he's got like a $8.5, maybe closer to $9 million AAV. He's got like 6 or 7 years left on his contract. Like, he's signed for a while. So it would be an interesting trade there. I'm not sure what the Canucks would have to give up. Like, part of me thinks maybe Elias Pettersson. Would they be willing to swap one for one? If not Elias Pettersson, you're probably looking at like a top-end prospect, a first-round pick in a future date, a really good roster player, some other things. So I don't think it's going to happen because I do not believe that Larkin's on the trade block there for Detroit. And even though I do think they might make some big moves this offseason, I don't think Larkin will be one of them. But it's a very interesting concept. Could the Canucks try and target Larkin? They could try and target Barzal. I think it's possible. I think we could see the Vancouver Canucks be linked to a ton of top-level centers in the NHL, especially if they were open to moving Elias Pettersson. So we'll have to wait and see what happens there, but keep your eye on Larkin's name. I don't think he'll get moved, but it does sound like the Canucks may have a tiny bit of interest in him, so we'll have to wait and see on that. Going over to the New York Rangers, according to Mollie Walker of the New York Post, she was talking about Alexis Lafreniere and said that while he hasn't come up in trade rumors a whole bunch because he just signed that long-term extension, he's got a new contract that's about to kick in this offseason, and that is going to involve some trade protection. I think it's not this year, but next year that the trade protection will kick in for Lafreniere. And with that in mind, there's been some people, including Walker, who said that there's a potentiality the Rangers could try and move on from Lafreniere. Like, Lafreniere this past year did not have a great season. Like 2 years ago, when the Rangers went to the Eastern Conference Final, Lafreniere finally broke out. It was a great sign to see for the New York Rangers, as Lafreniere finally has a big season. He was playing with Panarin, he was playing with Trocheck. He was putting up the numbers you expect a first overall pick to put up. Now, not great numbers, but a lot better than he had been in recent memory. But this past year, he regressed a little bit again, didn't do overly well, and sort of making people second guess that contract extension that he signed. Now, I'm not going to say it's a guarantee that Lafreniere gets moved, because they've already moved a whole bunch of youth off that team, like Kakko's now in Seattle, Hiedel's now in Vancouver. Those are two of their bigger type younger pieces. They still have guys like Gabe Perreault, Brett Berard, Brennan Othman, but no established younger type players at the NHL level. So I would be quite surprised if they did move off of Lafreniere, but given the season he had, I would not be one bit surprised if we did see Alexis Lafreniere's name in the trade rumor mill, although I don't think they will trade him, so I'll have to wait and see on that. Going over to the Ottawa Senators, according to Bruce Garrioch of the Ottawa Sun, he was talking recently about what the Ottawa Senators could do this offseason, and he mentions that there are a few teams out there in the NHL that are wondering if the Ottawa Senators, closer to the draft, might be open to trading Drake Batherson. Now, Batherson, I know some Ottawa Senators fans do not like the production he's done and did not like overly what he did in the playoffs, but he had a really solid season. I think it was like a 60-plus point season. Like, he had a really good season. He's only making $4.95 million, I think, for this upcoming season and the year after, so he is on a shorter term deal, but he's got a really good contract for the points that he puts up. So unless you're getting like a first round pick and a really good roster player, I highly doubt Ottawa trades Drake Batherson. Personally, I do think that Batherson will wind up staying just because of how good value his contract is and how good of a piece he was for that Ottawa Senators team. But with the contract that he has, there are going to be some teams who could definitely try and overpay for him. So I wouldn't rule out for sure that Batherson wouldn't get moved. We've seen Steve Staios make some bold moves like Josh Norris at the deadline for Dylan Cozens, which completely worked out. Although I was a little bit surprised that they moved on from Norris, but Cozens was a great ad for the Ottawa Senators. Maybe they could do something similar with Drake Batherson. I don't know. But personally, my belief at this point in time is that Batherson will stay in Ottawa beyond this year, but Garrioch does say that some teams are wondering if Batherson could be moved somewhere closer to the draft. So we're going to have to wait and see on that, but keep your eye on Drake Batherson, especially nearing the draft, as he seems to be a potential name that the Ottawa Senators could wind up trying to move. And lastly, going over to the St. Louis Blues. Could the St. Louis Blues move Jordan Kyrou? I know it's a little bit crazy to say, but according to Rutherford from The Athletic, he was recently talking about the St. Louis Blues and Jordan Kyrou. Now, I think that's a little bit of a surprise to see Kyrou's name in the trade rumor mill, but it's a very interesting concept. So Kyrou's coming off a season where he had 36 goals, 70 points, was a major reason as to why the Blues had that second half surge that led him into a playoff spot and pushed the President's Trophy winning Winnipeg Jets to a 7-game series. So Kyrou was a great player for the St. Louis Blues this year and is still one of the top players on that Blues team. But he is about to have his new contract kick in on July 1st. He's making 8 years at $8.125 on his new extension, and Rutherford does wonder if before his full no movement clause kicks in during that extension, could the Blues consider trading Jordan Kyrou? Now, I personally do not believe this will happen because Kyrou is such a good and young piece on that Blues team. Like, even if the Blues were to go through retool, like, he's going to be a player you're going to want to build around. So I do not see Jordan Kyrou getting moved, but we have seen a couple of teams in the past be open to moving some of their players who are just about to go on a new contract and get a full no movement clause to try and get out of the contract before it winds up kicking in. So I highly doubt that the Blues are going to trade Jordan Kyrou, but it's very interesting because if Kyrou's name is available and the Blues would be open to moving him, and we know that Doug Armstrong, the GM of the St. Louis Blues, is very much open to making some bold moves, I would say that probably all 31 other teams would have major interest in Kyrou. And if the Blues were to move him, they could get a first-round pick, a star-level talent, probably already in the NHL level, a really good prospect, and probably a couple of other things too. So I don't think the Blues will move him because of how good of a player Kyrou is for that Blues team, but it's a very interesting concept because I think there would be a ton of teams interested if Kyrou was available for the St. Louis Blues. So definitely, we're going to have to wait and see on that. Keep your eye on Kyrou, especially leading up until July 1st when his contract kicks in, but we're going to have to wait and see if Kyrou does wind up getting traded or not. So we're going to have to wait and see on that. But that's all I'm talking for today. I'll let you guys thoughts on all that was discussed here today. Do you see Kyrou being moved, Lafreniere being moved, or Batherson being moved? And if so, what sort of an ask do you think those three guys could acquire for their current teams? Do you see the Canucks trying to acquire Dylan Larkin from the Detroit Red Wings? And if so, what sort of an ask do the Red Wings trying to ask for? And would you have been surprised if Brad Marchand had actually gone to Los Angeles instead of Florida? Definitely get your thoughts on all of that down in the comment section below, plus all the news updates including Utah, the Islanders winning the draft lottery, and the GM coaching updates, plus the signings and the injury updates from our past couple days. Definitely get your thoughts on all of that down in the comment section below. That's all I want to talk for today. Remember to like this video, and if you'd like to subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I'll never do it without you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to comment down in the comment section below. Also a blog to news, rumors, analysis. If you guys want to check that out, don't forget to check that down in the description below. Can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.